Your brain is built to remember danger, and sometimes betrayal gets stored that way. Think about it. A relationship ended years ago. You don't talk to that person anymore. You built a new life. Maybe you're even with someone else now. Then one random afternoon, you hear their name. Or you see an old picture. Or somebody takes a little too long to text you back. And suddenly, your body reacts before your mind even knows what's happening. Your stomach tightens. Your chest feels heavy. Your thoughts start racing. For a few seconds, you're not in the present anymore. You're back there. So here's the question. Why can something that happened years ago still feel emotionally alive today? It doesn't necessarily mean you're bitter. It doesn't mean you're weak. And it definitely doesn't mean you secretly want that person back. Part of the answer is that your brain doesn't treat every memory equally. Some memories are stored as information. Others become warnings. And betrayal can become a warning. But here's where this gets uncomfortable. More than a century before neuroscience could explain emotional memory, one philosopher was already obsessed with what happens when pain stops being something that happened to you and becomes something you start seeing the entire world through. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche, and the word he used was ressentiment, not ordinary anger, something much more dangerous, because anger can pass. Ressentiment can become an identity, and once that happens, the person who hurt you may no longer be in your life, but they're still influencing it. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine touching a hot stove as a kid. You learn fast. You don't need to burn yourself 5 more times. Your nervous system gets the message. Hot stove. Danger. Remember this. That kind of learning is useful. Your brain is supposed to remember experiences connected to threat. Emotional events can work in a similar way. When something hits you with fear, humiliation, shock, or betrayal, the brain can assign that experience greater emotional importance. That's why you might forget what you ate last Thursday, but remember exactly where you were standing when you discovered someone had lied to you. You remember the room, the message, their face, the sentence that suddenly made everything click. Maybe even the time on the clock. The brain isn't doing this to torture you. It's trying to learn. The problem is that human relationships are much more complicated than fire, because your brain doesn't just remember, that person hurt me. It can also remember, this kind of silence came before I got hurt. That change in tone came before I got hurt. That behavior came before I discovered the truth. Then years later, someone completely different does something vaguely similar, and the alarm goes off. Maybe they're not lying. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they're busy. Maybe nothing is wrong. But your brain isn't waiting for a courtroom-level standard of evidence. It's comparing patterns. And when an old pattern once ended in pain, your mind can become very good at detecting anything that resembles it, sometimes too good. This is where Nietzsche becomes interesting. When Nietzsche wrote about ressentiment, he wasn't simply describing someone who was mad about the past. He was describing what can happen when a wound doesn't remain a wound. It becomes a lens. At first, the story is, one person betrayed me. Then slowly, without noticing, it becomes, people can't be trusted. One person cheated. Now intimacy feels dangerous. One friend stabbed you in the back. Now vulnerability feels stupid. One person abandoned you. Now anyone who gets close enough to matter begins to feel like a future threat. That's the real danger. The betrayal spreads, not because the original event is happening again, but because the past starts making predictions about the future. And sometimes those predictions become your personality. You call it being realistic. You call it being careful. You say, I've learned how people really are. But here's an uncomfortable question. Are you responding to the person in front of you, or to someone who isn't even there anymore? Think about the person who betrayed you. What are they doing right now? Maybe they're at work. Maybe they're eating dinner. Maybe they're laughing at something on their phone. Maybe they barely think about what happened anymore. Meanwhile, you can still replay the scene years later. That's one of the cruelest parts of resentment. The person who caused the wound doesn't necessarily continue carrying it. You do, and this is why resentment is so deceptive. It feels like you're holding on to what happened because you're refusing to let them get away with it. But psychologically, you may be the only person still paying for it. That's not justice. That's continued exposure. Nietzsche's warning wasn't, you shouldn't feel angry. That would be absurd. Betrayal hurts precisely because something important was violated. Trust, loyalty, safety, maybe even your image of yourself. The danger begins when the wound starts organizing everything that comes afterward. Who you trust, how much you reveal, how quickly you pull away, how you interpret silence. How suspicious you become when somebody's behavior changes. Eventually, a person who never hurt you can end up living inside rules created by someone who did. And that brings us to another question. Why does betrayal hurt so much more when it comes from someone close? If a random stranger lies to you, it's annoying. Maybe it ruins your afternoon, but usually that's it. You never gave that person access. You never lowered your guard. But when the betrayal comes from your partner, your closest friend, a sibling, someone you've trusted for years, the damage is different. Because trust works by reducing vigilance. You stop checking. You stop questioning everything. You allow yourself to relax. That's literally part of intimacy. You cannot create a deep relationship while behaving as if the other person is under permanent investigation. So when someone you trusted betrays you, you don't only lose trust in them, sometimes you lose trust in your own judgment. And that's where a much more frightening question appears. If I didn't see that coming, what else am I missing? That question can outlive the relationship. Now, you're not merely protecting yourself from another betrayal. You're trying to make sure you're never fooled again. So you become hyper-aware. A late reply suddenly matters. A phone turned face down matters. A different tone matters. A weird pause matters. A small inconsistency matters. And yes, sometimes those things genuinely are warning signs. But other times, you're fighting yesterday's battle in today's relationship. That's how resentment expands. It starts with one person. Then it leaks into everything, like a drop of ink spreading through water. At first, you know exactly where the pain came from. Years later, you just know that trusting people makes you uncomfortable. You can't even explain why anymore. Someone doesn't text for 4 hours, and your mind fills in the missing story. Someone seems distant for one day, and you're already preparing yourself to be abandoned. Someone says, "Nothing's wrong," and you immediately think, "That's what the last person said." The past has become your reference point, your emotional map. And again, your mind thinks it's helping. It's saying, "We missed the danger once. We're not missing it again." Protection is the intention, but isolation can become the result. Here's where a lot of advice goes wrong. People say, "You just need to forgive and forget." That's easy to say when it wasn't your betrayal. Forgetting isn't the goal. Some emotionally important memories may remain with you for a very long time. The question isn't whether you can delete them. The question is whether they still carry the same authority. Because there's a huge difference between these two sentences. I remember what happened. And what happened still decides how I live. Two people can remember the exact same betrayal. Both can describe the conversation. Both remember the pain. Both know what it cost them. But one person uses the memory as information. The other uses it as a blueprint. One says, "Now I know what red flags I shouldn't ignore." The other says, "I will never trust anyone again." One learned. The other built a prison. And sometimes, from the inside, they look exactly the same. Nietzsche was deeply concerned with what a person does with suffering. Does suffering become your justification for shrinking? Or can you transform it into something that makes you more capable of living? This connects to his idea of self-overcoming. Not pretending the pain didn't happen. Not becoming numb. Not acting tough. But refusing to let suffering have the final word on who you become. That's very different from revenge. Revenge still keeps the other person at the center of your life. Everything is still about them. What Nietzsche points toward is something harder, getting your authorship back. You don't erase the chapter. You simply stop letting that chapter write the rest of the book. And here's one of the hardest questions in this entire video. Is someone in your life today paying for what someone else did to you years ago? Maybe they haven't betrayed you. Maybe they've actually been consistent. But you keep them at arm's length. You test them. You expect them to fail. You search for contradictions. You withhold parts of yourself because being fully known now feels dangerous. Not because of anything they've done, but because of what someone else taught you. That's when an old betrayal stops being history. It becomes inheritance, and the new person inherits consequences they never created. But none of this means you should become naive. Some people shouldn't be trusted again. Some relationships should end permanently. Some betrayals absolutely justify stronger boundaries. Healing doesn't mean giving someone unlimited access to you. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. And moving forward doesn't mean pretending what happened was acceptable. It means something much simpler. The person who hurt you no longer gets to determine the shape of every relationship that comes after them. That's freedom, not forgetting, not excusing. Freedom. Nietzsche's idea of the will to power is often reduced to domination. But there's another way to understand it, as the capacity to transform yourself rather than remain trapped by what happened to you, to take suffering and make something from it. Maybe you become more discerning. Maybe your boundaries improve. Maybe you stop ignoring obvious signs just because you're afraid of losing someone. Those can be valuable lessons. But there's a line. If the lesson becomes, never let anyone get too close, then what feels like protection may actually be fear. If the lesson becomes, never depend on anybody, maybe independence has become isolation. If the lesson becomes, everyone eventually betrays you, then one person's actions have successfully rewritten your view of humanity, and they don't deserve that much power. So if you're still carrying something that happened years ago, stop asking yourself, why am I not over this yet? That question usually adds shame to pain. Ask something more useful. What did this experience teach me? Then ask, which parts of that lesson are still helping me? And finally, which parts are now hurting me? Keep the wisdom. Question the fear. Keep the boundary. Drop the prison. Keep the memory. Take back the steering wheel, because healing isn't necessarily the day you stop remembering. Sometimes healing is the day the memory shows up, and you notice something different. Your body reacts. You remember what happened, but you don't automatically act from it anymore. The memory is still in the car, it just isn't driving. So maybe the question isn't, when am I finally going to forget what they did? Maybe the question is, how long am I willing to let what they did keep choosing for me? Because the betrayal happened once. But resentment can make you relive its consequences for years, and at some point, the next decision becomes yours, not theirs, yours. If this brought up something you've been carrying quietly, leave one word in the comments. Resentment, no explanation required. I want to see how many people have been living with the same invisible weight. And if this changed the way you think about betrayal, hit the like button and subscribe, because in the next video, we're going one step further. How do you actually let go of resentment without pretending the betrayal never happened? That's where the real work begins. I'll see you in the next one.